He was really ill. And he was in Montreal. And always he used to be with us on my birthday. And this birthday, he sent me flowers from Montreal. I said, I'm sorry, Mom. This time I can't be with you on your birthday, but I'll make it up. But of course it was October, and then of course he was very ill. It was very sad at that time.
For over 30 years, the world believed it knew everything about Freddie Mercury. His music, his fame, his mystery. But what if one of the biggest chapters of his life was never told? A secret daughter, 17 hidden journals, and a story kept quiet by those closest to him. Until now. This isn't just a new detail. It's a revelation that changes how we see one of the greatest icons of all time.
This is the first kind of press conference we've had for a long while, 3, 4, 5 years maybe. So I don't mind it. If I had to do this every day, forget it.
Now, more than 3 decades after his death, a single revelation is reshaping the way we see the man behind the microphone. According to a forthcoming biography, Freddie Mercury had a daughter. Her identity was kept secret from the public, and even many in the music industry had no idea she existed.
Of course people ask the same questions, because some of the questions are current and they want to know about the same things.
The woman, now 48, has come forward quietly, sharing her story not for attention, but to tell the truth about her father, and to finally give voice to his private writings that have remained hidden for nearly half a century. The biography, titled Love, Freddie, is written by rock journalist Lesley-Ann Jones. It is based in large part on 17 handwritten journals that Mercury left to his daughter before his death in 1991. These journals span from the late 1970s to the final months of his life and include personal reflections, observations, and deeply emotional entries that offer new insight into who Freddie Mercury really was, not just as a performer, but as a person. The story begins in 1976 at a time when the Queen was gaining major international momentum. That year, they had just released You're My Best Friend, and Mercury's public image was at the height of its glam rock flair. But away from the cameras, something entirely unexpected was happening. According to the biography, Mercury had a brief affair with the wife of one of his close friends. That affair, described as short and unplanned, resulted in a pregnancy. The woman, a Roman Catholic, chose to keep the baby. Mercury, rather than distancing himself or denying the situation, chose to stay involved, privately but deliberately. The child, referred to publicly only as B, was raised by her mother and her stepfather, but always knew that her biological father was Freddie Mercury. From a young age, she was told the truth, and more importantly, she says she felt it. Mercury was not a distant figure. He visited regularly, had his own room in their home, and remained in close contact, even while traveling the world with the Queen. According to B's own letter, shared in the book's opening chapter, Mercury called her every day while he was on tour. He would ask about her schoolwork, talk about what was happening at home, and make sure she felt supported. Though their relationship was kept out of the public eye, B describes it as loving, committed, and absolutely central to her life. The existence of this child was known only to a small inner circle. Mercury's parents knew. So did his sister. Mary Austin, who remained one of his closest confidants until the end of his life, was also aware. It's not clear how many people within the Queen camp, such as his bandmates Brian May or Roger Taylor, knew at the time. What is clear is that no one spoke about it publicly. The story remained hidden for almost 50 years. Before his death in 1991, Mercury handed B a collection of 17 personal journals. These weren't scraps or scribbled notes. They were carefully written volumes, filled with memories from his childhood in Zanzibar and India, stories about his rise to fame, observations about the pressures of being a global icon, and above all, heartfelt reflections on his daughter. He wrote about the moment he found out he was going to be a father. He wrote about birthdays he missed while on the road. He wrote about the conflict between the life he lived publicly and the love he felt privately. For decades, B kept the journals to herself. She had no interest in fame. She didn't ask for recognition, nor did she seek out attention from Queen fans or the media. She lived a quiet life in Europe, built a career in the medical field, and eventually started a family of her own. Freddie Mercury, once one of the world's most famous men, became a private part of her life, a father, and eventually a grandfather to her children. It wasn't until recently, in her late 40s, that she decided to share the story. According to Lesley-Ann Jones, B reached out 3 years ago and proposed the idea of a book, not to glorify herself, but to finally give Mercury's private voice a place in his public story. Jones admits that at first she was skeptical, but after seeing the journals, reading the letters, and working with B over several years, she became convinced of the story's authenticity. What stands out most in this revelation is not just the secrecy itself, but the deliberate choice Mercury made to separate this part of his life from everything else. He was known for fiercely guarding his privacy. He avoided the press whenever possible. He rarely gave interviews in his later years and kept the details of his personal life closely protected. The fact that he chose not to make his daughter public isn't surprising, but the depth of his involvement with her is. There is no mention of B in Mercury's will, which famously left the bulk of his estate to Mary Austin. But according to the biography, Mercury made private legal arrangements to ensure his daughter was provided for. She never came forward to contest the will, and she never sought public recognition. In fact, she still prefers not to reveal her real name or exact location in order to protect the life she has built away from the public eye. The story of Mercury's daughter is more than a celebrity headline. It's a reminder of how complex people can be, even those we think we know. Mercury lived a life of extremes. He was both public and private, confident and self-protective, adored and often lonely. His daughter's story adds another layer to that complexity. It shows him not only as a performer, but as a father, someone who found joy and meaning in a relationship the world never saw. As Love, Freddie prepares for release, it's clear that this story will challenge the way fans remember Mercury. But it won't replace the legacy he left behind. It will deepen it. For years, Freddie Mercury has been celebrated for his voice, his charisma, and his contribution to music. Now, through the words he wrote by hand and the memories of the daughter he kept close, we're starting to see the full picture. A man who gave everything on stage and who, behind closed doors, gave just as much to the people he loved. As fans, we often build an image of celebrities based on what we see in public: interviews, performances, media appearances, and tabloid headlines. For someone like Freddie Mercury, that image was a powerful one. A larger-than-life figure with a voice that could fill stadiums and a style that pushed the boundaries of fashion, gender norms, and performance. But in Freddie's case, the public persona only told half the story. What many people didn't realize was that Freddie Mercury was an intensely private person. Offstage, he was quiet, thoughtful, and highly guarded. Friends and colleagues have often said that the man they knew in private was almost the complete opposite of his flamboyant stage self. He valued calm, routine, and the ability to control his environment, something that became increasingly difficult as Queen's fame grew. One of the key relationships that reveals this hidden side of Freddie was with Mary Austin. They met in the early 1970s before Queen reached international success. Mary was 19 at the time and Freddie was 24. The two quickly became inseparable, eventually moving in together and getting engaged. For a time, they planned to marry. But as Freddie came to terms with his sexuality, he eventually confessed to Mary that he was attracted to men. Their romantic relationship ended, but their bond did not. Despite everything, Mary remained a central figure in Freddie's life until the very end. He once said, "All my lovers asked me why they couldn't replace Mary, but it's simply impossible. Mary is my only friend, and I don't want anybody else." She was the person he trusted the most, and when he wrote his will, he left her the majority of his estate, including his home, garden lodge, and the rights to most of his music royalties. This was no small gesture. It showed not only his loyalty but also the deep emotional connection they shared. Mary Austin wasn't just someone from his past. She was part of his inner world, one of the few who truly knew Freddie Mercury. She also happened to be one of the people who knew about his secret daughter, a detail that remained hidden from the public for decades. Freddie's desire for privacy wasn't limited to his relationships. It extended to nearly every aspect of his life. He rarely gave interviews, especially as he got older, and he was known for carefully controlling the narrative around his personal matters. This became especially clear in the final years of his life when he was diagnosed with AIDS. Freddie is believed to have received his diagnosis in 1987. At the time, the AIDS crisis was devastating communities and causing widespread fear and misinformation. Mercury, aware of the stigma surrounding the disease, chose to keep his diagnosis a secret from the public. While close friends, family, and members of Queen were informed, he continued to perform and record without ever confirming the illness publicly. In fact, Freddie only acknowledged his AIDS diagnosis in a brief public statement on November 23, 1991, just one day before his death. In that statement, he said, "I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has come now for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth." The timing of that statement reflects just how deeply he valued privacy and how protective he was of the people closest to him. It also speaks to his understanding of public perception. Freddie knew that if the news of his illness broke earlier, the media would likely focus more on his condition than on his music. He didn't want pity. He didn't want headlines about his health. He wanted to be remembered for the art he created and the joy he brought to audiences around the world. Another dimension of his privacy was how he handled his romantic relationships. While Mercury was known to be in long-term relationships with men during the 1980s, including his partner Jim Hutton, who was with him until the end, he never publicly labeled his sexuality. He lived openly within his trusted circles but never made a grand public declaration. This choice allowed him to retain control over how much of himself he gave to the public. In a time when being openly gay could have impacted a person's career and public standing, Mercury navigated his identity with a mixture of courage and caution. He neither denied who he was nor used it as a public badge. He simply lived it, on his own terms. In private, those who knew him described him as warm, funny, and generous. He loved having close friends over for dinner, often cooking for them himself. He was also a devoted cat owner, once naming his album Mr. Bad Guy in honor of one of his beloved pets. Mercury reportedly had several cats throughout his life and even made sure they were cared for in his will. It's small details like these that reveal how different he was in private: humble, affectionate, and loyal. He was also a deeply creative person beyond music. Many fans don't know that Mercury studied art and graphic design at Ealing Art College before his music career took off. In fact, he designed Queen's famous crest logo himself. The emblem combines the zodiac signs of all 4 band members and incorporates elements like lions, crabs, and fairies in a royal, almost mythological design. It's just another example of how hands-on he was in shaping the identity of the band, and how much of an artist he was at heart. There's also evidence that Freddie gave quietly to causes he cared about. He made donations to AIDS-related charities, often anonymously. He supported friends in need behind the scenes. These acts were never published or turned into headlines. For Mercury, kindness didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be genuine. All of these layers, his bond with Mary Austin, his careful navigation of sexuality, his secrecy around illness, his generosity, and his quiet passions, form the backdrop to the more recent revelation about his daughter and the 17 journals he left behind. They show that keeping her a secret wasn't an act of denial or shame, but part of a much larger pattern in how he protected the most meaningful parts of his life. The man who was so fearless on stage was equally deliberate in guarding his personal world. It wasn't about creating mystery for mystery's sake. It was about preserving something real in a life that was otherwise always on display. By understanding this context, it becomes easier to see how a secret daughter could have remained unknown for so long, and why Mercury might have chosen to keep that relationship sacred, away from the cameras and the curiosity of the world. Before their discovery, many fans believed they already understood the layers of Mercury's personality. He was enigmatic, yes, but the details of his life had been studied closely for decades through interviews, biographies, and retrospectives. What no one expected was that the most honest and unfiltered portrait of him would come from pages he wrote in private, addressed to no one, shared with no one, until now. The diaries begin around 1976, the same year Mercury learned that he was going to become a father. His daughter, now known publicly only as B, was born later that year. According to Lesley-Ann Jones, the biographer entrusted with the journals, Mercury began writing shortly after finding out about the pregnancy. That timing suggests the diaries may have been, at least initially, a way for him to process the surprise and complexity of the situation. But what started as a response to a single event quickly evolved into a long-term habit. Over the next 15 years, Mercury would return to those pages again and again, using them to document his thoughts, fears, regrets, and joys. The entries are described as deeply personal. Some recall his childhood in Zanzibar and India. He writes about attending boarding school and later relocating to London with his family following political unrest. These early memories help paint a picture of someone who understood displacement, cultural transition, and the feeling of being an outsider, long before he became a global superstar. In some ways, these experiences may have shaped his desire to control how much of himself he shared with the world. As the years go on, the journals begin to focus more on his work with Queen and the challenges that came with fame. Mercury writes about the pressures of constant touring, the physical and emotional exhaustion of performing, and the strange disconnect of being adored by millions but known by very few. He speaks about wanting stability, about craving normality, desires that were often hard to achieve in the chaotic rhythm of his public life. But what stands out most, according to Jones, are the parts where he writes about his daughter. These aren't the entries of someone indifferent or emotionally distant. They reflect genuine affection, often mixed with guilt over the things he missed. Birthdays, school events, day-to-day moments that most parents take for granted. Still, he tried to be present. He called her often while he was on tour and visited whenever he could. Through the journals, it's clear that this wasn't a casual relationship. It was something he valued deeply, even if he never spoke about it publicly. The decision to leave the journals with B wasn't just a gesture of trust. It was a sign that he saw her as someone who could carry forward the version of himself the world had never seen. In giving her his most private thoughts, he offered her a full picture of who he was, something very few people ever received. For B, the diaries became not only a connection to her father, but a responsibility. For many years, she kept them to herself, not out of secrecy or shame, but out of respect. It wasn't until she reached midlife, long after Mercury's death, that she felt ready to share their contents. That decision led her to Lesley-Ann Jones, a rock journalist who had previously written about Queen and was known for her balanced, respectful approach to storytelling. Jones was skeptical at first, unsure if B's claims could be proven. But after spending years with her, reviewing the journals, and cross-checking the details with known events in Mercury's life, she became convinced of their authenticity. What emerged was a more human, intimate portrait of Mercury, someone who was just as complex and emotionally rich off stage as he was brilliant on stage. The journals also contain moments of emotional struggle. Mercury writes about loneliness, how, despite his fame, he often felt isolated. He describes the difficulty of maintaining relationships, not just romantic ones, but even friendships, in an environment where trust was hard to come by. The pressure to constantly perform, to always be on, sometimes made it difficult for him to truly relax or be himself. These reflections add depth to the public understanding of Mercury, showing that behind the dazzling smile and legendary performances, there was someone who carried emotional weight just like anyone else. They also provide insight into his later years, especially as his health began to decline. Mercury doesn't go into clinical detail about his illness, but he does reflect on his mortality, on the shrinking sense of time, and on the urgency to make peace with the people and choices in his life. He writes not with fear, but with acceptance, focusing more on the importance of love, memory, and legacy than on the illness itself. It's in these later pages that he speaks most tenderly of B, about how proud he is of her, and how grateful he is to have known that kind of love in his life. In addition to personal reflections, the journals also include casual notes, ideas for songs, early drafts of lyrics, lists of things to do, and sketches. These elements show Mercury's creative side in its rawest form. He wasn't just a polished performer. He was a constantly evolving artist, someone who was always thinking, always creating, even in private moments. Seeing these sketches and notes side by side with emotional reflections gives readers a fuller picture of who he really was. Interestingly, the journals also reveal his sense of humor. He writes with wit, occasionally poking fun at himself, at his bandmates, or at the ridiculousness of celebrity life. Even in his most personal writing, Mercury's voice remains distinct, playful, bold, but also sincere. It's this balance of honesty and artistry that makes the journals such a valuable part of his legacy. B has said in interviews that she doesn't want fame. She's not interested in stepping into the public spotlight or in using her story to change the narrative around Queen or Freddie Mercury. What she wants is for people to understand her father more fully. For decades, the world has celebrated his music, his talent, and his style. Now, through these journals, they can also appreciate his inner life, his fears, his joys, and the relationships that truly mattered to him. What makes this all the more moving is that Mercury never sought credit for this private role he played. He didn't use fatherhood to soften his image or add a personal touch to his public persona. He kept it sacred, separate, and protected. That decision says a lot about his character. It also explains why the revelation of these journals and of his daughter's existence has been met with so much curiosity and so much respect. For decades, Freddie Mercury has stood as one of music's most unforgettable figures. From his powerful four-octave voice to his commanding stage presence, his legacy seemed firmly established. An artist who defied convention, captured audiences worldwide, and left behind a catalog of music that continues to resonate with generations. His image was iconic. His story, it seemed, had already been told. But the truth is, even legends have chapters that remain unread. Now, through the words of a woman known only as B, Freddie Mercury's secret daughter, the world is being invited into a part of his life that was never meant to be public. And in doing so, that legacy is evolving. It's not being rewritten or undermined, it's being completed. This story doesn't diminish the power of Freddie's music or his place in pop culture. If anything, it makes him more human, more layered, and in many ways, more remarkable. Because while millions knew the performer, only a small handful knew the private man. The one who lived quietly, loved deeply, and made choices not for attention, but for protection. When B made the decision to come forward, it wasn't impulsive. It was the result of decades of thought. She'd spent her entire life in the shadow of a legend, choosing to remain silent even as Mercury's fame continued to grow after his death. She never gave interviews. She never made demands. She never sought to claim the Mercury name for herself. In fact, she built a life far away from the entertainment world, becoming a medical professional, starting her own family, and living anonymously in Europe. Her decision to reveal her identity came not from a desire to change history, but from a desire to honor the truth. She knew who her father was. She knew how he had loved her. And perhaps most importantly, she had the evidence. 17 handwritten journals filled with personal thoughts and stories that Mercury left to her before he died. For over 30 years, she kept those journals private. They were her connection to him, filled with reflections that only she had the right to read. But something has changed in recent years. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was a sense that the world was finally ready to see Mercury as more than a rock god. Or maybe it was simply time. Whatever the reason, she chose to share the story, not just of the diaries, but of the relationship they represented. Her story found its way to Lesley-Ann Jones, a respected rock journalist who had written extensively about Mercury and Queen in the past. Jones was initially skeptical, as anyone would be. But after working with B for several years, reading the journals and verifying details, she became convinced. The result is the biography Love, Freddie, a book that offers readers a new perspective on Mercury's life and legacy. What makes this revelation so powerful is not just the existence of a daughter, but the depth of Mercury's relationship with her. This wasn't a secret in the sense of a distant child Mercury never acknowledged. According to B, their bond was close and loving. He visited her regularly, had a room in her home, and spoke to her daily while on tour. He gave her guidance, affection, and emotional support. In every way that mattered, he was her father. Yet he chose not to share this with the public. There was no announcement, no photographs, no acknowledgement in his will. And that silence speaks volumes. It wasn't about shame. It was about protection. Mercury knew the cost of fame, what it could do to relationships, how it could distort private truths into public spectacle. By keeping B's existence private, He was preserving something sacred. Even today, Bea continues to protect her privacy. She hasn't revealed her full name. She hasn't asked for a place in Mercury's estate or in Queen's ongoing success. She wants nothing but the truth to be heard. The truth about who her father was to her and the love they shared behind closed doors. For fans, this revelation can feel like a shift. We thought we knew Mercury. We thought we understood the man behind the music. And now, we're discovering there was a whole chapter that no one outside his inner circle ever saw. But instead of complicating his legacy, it adds to it. Because if Freddie Mercury could be the showman who captivated the world, and at the same time be a devoted, hands-on father in secret, then that only deepens the respect many already feel for him. It shows a different kind of strength, the kind that isn't always loud, that doesn't always make headlines, the kind that happens quietly, in homes far from the spotlight, in daily phone calls, and in journals left behind for someone he loved. Those journals are now a gift to the world, but they were first a gift to his daughter. In them, Mercury left behind not only a record of his public journey, but of his private heart. He wrote about his fears, his regrets, his hopes for the future. He wrote about his childhood, his work, his friends, and his struggles. But more than anything, he wrote about love, the kind of love that doesn't need cameras or stages, the kind that just is. Now, as Love Freddie prepares for release, the public is about to see Mercury in a new light. Through the eyes of his daughter and the words in his journals, we're getting closer to the man behind the myth. It doesn't erase anything we already knew. If anything, it makes his story more complete, more real. In some ways, this is the legacy Mercury may have wanted all along, not just to be remembered for his voice or his costumes, but for the way he lived his life, for the choices he made to protect the people he loved, and for the truths he kept between the lines of fame and family. There's a quiet courage in what Bea has done. And there was courage, too, in how Mercury lived those final years, continuing to perform, continuing to write, even as his health declined. He died on his own terms, with dignity, with music still in his heart, and a family, both chosen and biological, around him. This final chapter doesn't change who Freddie Mercury was. It enhances who he was. It reminds us that even the brightest stars can have hidden orbits. And sometimes the most extraordinary parts of a person's life are the ones they kept entirely to themselves. Freddie Mercury gave the world music that continues to move and inspire. He created performances that are still unmatched in energy and emotion. But now, thanks to one woman's story and a collection of deeply personal words, we see another side of him. A man who loved in secret, who protected in silence, and who left behind not just a voice, but a legacy of quiet devotion. As fans, as listeners, as people, maybe that's the most powerful legacy of all.